Hello everyone, Rob Bertholf here, and in the latest in this series on the Awakening series, this one's entitled Credibility Traps. In this course, we'll discuss the importance of credibility, how to earn trust, how to become informed, and how to maintain credibility by avoiding traps set by the deceiver to strip away our reputation. We were going to talk about what the Spirit of Prophecy has to say about avoiding unnecessary conflict, and how to help others in a productive way who are trapped in a conspiracy theory, and how we can prepare for what's described in Matthew 24:24 of what's coming for us. Ultimately, the most important things that we can earn is credibility. Credibility is defined as the quality of being trusted and believed in. So trust is not given, it's earned. So how do we earn trust? Well, there's a number of different ways, a number of different traits that we need to embody in order to earn trust and credibility. The first way to earn trust is by being consistent. People want to know what they can expect. We value people who are consistent, and we trust those who are consistently trustworthy. Now, I recommend a course on personal branding where I really detail a lot more the importance of consistency. It's really this idea that as you're building a personal brand, if you are consistent to that brand, it then resonates as true. If you say you're one thing and then always are demonstrating something else, ultimately we see right through that, and the personal brand has no real value. Ultimately, your brand becomes something you don't want it to be. There's a saying that your trust account is more important than your bank account, and we need to be, really storing away credibility and trust more eagerly than we're trying to store away money. Like a savings, earning trust takes consistency. But what is trust? And ultimately, what is being trustworthy? Well, it's defined as being relied on and being honest and truthful. So being honest is being truthful. This means looking out for others' best interests, standing up for what's right, and also not getting caught up in the sensationalism and bending the objective to suit your desires. If we go back to the definition of credibility, there's a second definition of being convincing or believable. Unfortunately, sometimes we trust people that are not informed, but are very convincing. There's a danger to build credibility on things that are not true, because they can be, air quotes, right, credible liar, right? You don't want to be a credible liar. And the problem is that when we, build our credibility or build our reputation on things that are sensational, that are exciting, people love to hear, oh, what does he have to say now? But we know maybe that part of it's true, part of it I can't prove, but people are just eating it up, so I'm going to keep delivering it to them. That is not how to build credibility. We don't want to be a credible liar. So more than being credible, we need to be competent in the subjects that we're sharing. We need to be informed, right? We must be responsible for verifying information before sharing it. We cannot think we know more than we do. But how do we become informed? If you've watched the Manufacturing Consent, you see that so many of the sources that are put out there, we can't even trust. And so let's discuss about how to become informed. The process of informing oneself in truth is really simple and also seemingly difficult in this day and age. The first step to becoming informed is to realize that we likely know less than we think and are likely carrying on some cognitive biases and incorrect assumptions that we've accepted or been fed in the past. Stephen Hawking is quoted as, "The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge." And so when we are told things that are not true and they're repeated over and over, let's say in the media, that reinforces this illusion that we know things that we actually don't, right? The Bible tells us, 2 Timothy 2:15, to study to show yourself approved. That means we need to be looking at this. There's a whole course I do on rethinking thinking where I really discuss this, multitude really of cognitive biases that we need to process through if we wish to have an objective lens. In the course, we cover the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a tendency for unskilled individuals to overestimate their knowledge and for the tendency for experts to underestimate their knowledge. And so, Proverbs 12:15 tells us, "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he who heeds counsel is wise." This second step is we have to actually be driven to seek the truth and not be so complacent in our lives that we have no desire to push against the walls that seem to be built around us. Unfortunately, most would rather believe in comforting lies than unpleasant truths. There's a sense of security in knowledge, right? There's this same security that's emulated by having beliefs, even if they're not objectively, even if they are objectively unsound, which does not encourage this reevaluation. We don't want to reevaluate our beliefs because it's just easier to go on with kind of our, comforting lies. Society reinforces this. Those who are free thinkers are often shunned as outcasts, and those who take the time to ponder both sides of an argument are often considered indecisive, right? Giving way for a world where confidence is king. But as Socrates tells us, the unexamined life is not worth living. With a desire for knowledge, we must come time to research and vet sources, which we'll discuss more later, but there's so much competition for our time and attention that this can be incredibly difficult to do. Again, in the previous course, Manufacturing Consent, we discussed the various ways that our time is being stolen from us, and we're not able to spend the time to research and to think for ourselves. Some of these methods of control that we covered, are being pushed by consumerism, right? We buy more than we need, we get into debt, and then we work more than necessary to keep, up with the Joneses or chasing the American dream. This all leads to this overcommitment where every minute of the day is packed with activities, so we don't even have time to research anything, nevertheless do any critical thinking for ourselves, right? If our schedules, ultimately were, not full enough, then we get sucked into social media where we're literally being gamified and hypnotized, right? Diving deeper into echo chambers that just confirm our biases and remove any opportunity for productive discussion. If enough media sources are telling us what to think, then we just assume that everybody believes in its truth, right? Finally, those who actually seek the truth are met with shaming, discrediting, and name-calling. So the next step, if you've done all this and you understand that there is more to learn, you desire to seek truth, you actually make time to research the sources. Now you have an open mind to research and analyze information objectively. Unfortunately, we've been taught to be distrustful of strangers and biased information sources. So when new information is presented, it's far easier to just accept the part that aligns with what we already believe in, instead of researching it fully for ourselves and identify what's accurate and what's not. Right? The danger of this is that we could be on the outside of truth and not even know it. We could be walking around with blinders on and missing out on the clues to an objective reality. And this is often referred to as living in an echo chamber. Right? So many are in this concept, right? They're living in an environment which a person encounters only beliefs or opinions that coincide with their own. So their existing views are reinforced, and then alternate ideas are not even considered. And that's scary. So last, we want to get into, if we're able to achieve all these, right? If we're able to go through all these steps of being informed, we still need to be incredibly careful that we don't get caught up in a path of misinformation or misdirection. We can't be caught in a credibility trap. Let's explore this concept. I think that we can all agree that those in power do not want people changing, or let's just say it like this. They don't want people challenging their reality. So I'll share some specific examples shortly, but where this is especially dangerous is for those who are seeking truth. As a truth seeker, right? Imagine you're on the journey. You kind of start to wake up a little bit. You have no credibility, but you strap on your backpack, of knowledge. It may be somewhat empty at the time, and you seek out to find truth. As you journey, you start to discover truth and putting truths in your backpack. Your credibility may still be low, but you're building that credibility. The more you research, the more you gain, truth, right? The clearer you see the world around you. The clearer you're able to articulate that to others, and your credibility increases. As you awaken and start putting the pieces together of this bigger picture, once you actually see what's really going on, right? You become more of a threat to the establishment. So your credibility is high, but now you're also a target. the stakes become higher for you and also those that you influence. And so it's important that you don't fall in a trap of misinformation. These landmines are everywhere, and they're cleverly designed and disguised. Once you step on one, you're going to get blown in the air, right? Your reality will be shaken. You won't know who you can trust. Your credibility with others will be completely destroyed. Okay? The worst part is you still have truth in your backpack, but nobody will listen to what you have to say because you're classified as some crazy person, as a conspiracy theorist, right? These labels get thrown around so that nobody will actually listen to what you have to say. They won't allow you to unpack the backpack of truths because you now have a tainted brand. The lesson is this: trust can take years to earn and only seconds to lose. So how do we maintain credibility? Well, my advice starts with protecting yourself from faulty sources, right? Board up any paths for misinformation to sneak in. This means don't open your mind up to consume information without being able to apply critical thinking to it. An example would be watching cable news, right? As you're winding down for the night and have something on in the background, you're not able to spot the propaganda, right? Even having media on in the background, right? Anytime you're in an altered or distracted state, you may be accepting ideas and concepts without applying any critical thought to them, just allowing them to go straight in and have that home in your brain, right? So we must be guarded. There have been departments inside government agencies whose entire role is to spread information and cast doubt, right? So history tells us this. We need to investigate, ultimately this concept further. We need to see that misinformation is out there, intentionally misinformation. The next step is to avoid this poisonous gas. This means don't let your affinity with an information source cloud your judgment and blindly believing what that source says. Even if you think a source is trustworthy, you can't still just blindly accept everything that comes from it. I'm always trying to figure out what somebody's motivation is, right? So why do people share information? In some instances, it could be to help others navigate this crazy world that we live in. This is all rooted in a desire to spread light, right? From a core motivation of other-centeredness. But I've also found that this is usually only if somebody connected to faith, if that faith is pointing them to something greater than themselves. I've spent the last several years just researching and creating content that I have no interest in monetizing, but I've also lost out on several $1 million of missed earnings to create this type of content. It's because I want to build credibility and help people see through a logical lens so that they'll trust me, and that I can leverage this trust to share why it's logical and most probable that Jesus Christ is our creator God. So because of this, the information I share must be trustworthy, must be honest, must be logical, with no ulterior motive, no political leaning, no financial incentive, right? It has to be biased, obviously, though, to my viewpoint, which is a monotheistic viewpoint. However, the majority of the reasons that people share information is based on self-centered reasons, not other-centered reasons. Some share information to get visibility so they can leverage this for advertisers, Patreon selling products. This is rooted in self-preservation, along with influencing others so they can be in control. Another motivation is to share information simply to look smart, or a way to feel superior, or to exalt self. This is even more nuanced because there are some more reasons, but ultimately it comes down to, are you sharing information for other-centered reasons or self-centered reasons? And again, this is a framework that I put together that I can reuse for just about any situation. Is about not looking at the surface level, always thinking what's below the surface, and why is someone trying to communicate this with me? Why, what's their motivation? My opinion is, if you don't know someone's agenda, you can't really trust them. And everyone has an agenda, right? So that's why I'm trying to be, typically pretty straightforward with what my agenda is. And I think the other piece of this is, again, I mentioned this quote earlier, is it's on us to make sure that we are not, that we're thinking for ourselves ultimately, that we're not just blindly going in and allowing others to think for us. The Bible tells us to study to show ourselves approved, right? Rightly dividing the word of truth. We are told that we need to study and think for ourselves. And this will this right here will help us get out of so many potential traps that are set for us. And the next, and this is a very important one, a major trap is this us versus them mentality. It's right versus left, conservative versus liberal. It's all these labels that try and polarize you and try and show that, there's these two sides and you have to choose a side. Trust me when I say, if you are partisan, you are not awake yet. If you are so identifying with one party, then you have no idea how asleep you are. And I don't say that in a condescending way. I say that in a way just to help you understand that everything is being manufactured around you, right? There's a whole concept called a Hegelian dialectic. I talk about it in other courses, but it's this idea that in fact, check the manufacturing consent course. There's this whole concept that if you can be placed in one extreme or the other, they're able to move the needle around you. And so this whole concept of partisanship, or this left-right paradigm, ultimately is manufactured, right? There's a theory that these two political parties, right, are part of this paradigm where both parties are, deceptively share common interests and goals. Behind the scenes, and you can see this, behind the scenes, all these politicians are all friends behind the scenes, right? Why? Right? Because there's essentially one ruling authority. And again, don't go too far here. Don't take this to a conclusion past what this means. The ruling authority is whoever's in charge of the financials, right? The reason that they're on the same team, the reason they all vote for the same thing is because money, typically, right? When you look at the lobbyist situation, we should not have lobbying in Congress and the Senate, etc. It shouldn't be allowed, because that's why these people are all, they're all eating from the same table. And that's whatever special interest is feeding them. So, the idea, though, is that as one ruling authority, the two parties act to create this divisiveness and influence the general population while keeping control of the political spectrum. Now, there's a whole book, incredibly researched book called Tragedy and Hope by a former counsel and foreign relations archivist, and Georgetown University professor Carol Quigley. And in this, we read a very disturbing viewpoint of political history, and it has, it speaks to this concept of nearly two identical political parties who embrace diverse ideologies while maintaining this cohesive agenda. In the quote, she writes, "Instead of the two parties should be almost identical, so the American people can throw the rascals out of any election without leading to any profound or extreme shift in policy." Look at why the defense sector every year continues to make, to get larger and larger spending, whether you're on the right or the left, whether it's, the Republicans or the Democrats, no matter who it is, the defense sector always gets more money. Why is that? This is a concept called a managed or guided democracy, where a formally democratic government is converted into an authoritarian rule. Now, again, be clear, I'm not talking about the Illuminati or anything like this. Go watch my course on public secrets and you'll find out what my standpoint is about that and who actually rules the world right now. It's not the Illuminati, okay? But what I'm talking about is this idea that there is an authoritarian rule through special interest. There's an authoritarian rule through those that have an agenda who are guiding everything, right? Now, this is essentially legitimized by elections that are quote unquote free and fair, but ultimately have no impact on the direction of the government. Now, if we start talking about, the round table groups and semi-secret ruling entities, that would break the rules of maintaining credibility. Okay? So be clear that I'm not talking about that, right? Do not get caught, the next rule, number 4, do not get caught up in the momentum of an idea that you snowball and stop thinking critically. So here, I'm talking about how there's two political parties with one core agenda, okay? If you then take that concept and then say, yeah, Rob, I agree with you, and here it's the Illuminati, it's the aliens, it's Soros, it's whatever you're going to say behind this, you're not staying calm and rational, and you're breaking the rules of how to maintain credibility. Okay? Do not get so caught up into an idea that you stop thinking critically. This means just because one thing is true does not mean that we can jump to the next conclusion. At all times, we must stay calm, rational, be objective, keep a level head, especially when communicating to other people. Now, Ephesians 5 tells us that, awake, you that sleep, and rise from the dead, and Christ will give thee light. We are called to awaken. We are called to understand that the reality that we think we're living in is actually pretty far from what is real. And if we look to Christ, Christ will give us, right? If we pray for the Holy Spirit to give us discernment, we will be given discernment. And God will start to reveal things to us and open our minds to just really the idea that even the entire earth as we understand it is actually just part of a greater controversy that's happening. And so it's really important that we not get so caught up in things that are meaningless, and so caught up in things that we cannot prove, or things that are sensational, and have a level head and understand what's really going on in the bigger picture of what we are doing here in this great controversy. Romans 13:11, and know that knowing the time, right? So we are to know the time. We are to understand the times we live in, and knowing the time, know that it's high time to awake out of sleep, for our salvation is nearer than we believed. Okay, so you can apply this to one, the soon returning of our Savior. You can also apply this to how to wake people up out of sleep, out of slumber. Right? When sharing information, treat people as if they are asleep. Don't just start jumping on them while they're asleep. Right? Feed them information more gradually until they're ready to receive more information. You can't just force things onto people abruptly and expect them to then receive it. Right? If you come in while someone's sleeping, and metaphorically shout at them with a magnaphone, right? Whatever it is, megaphone, they're not going to receive it. If you want to share something, as an example, as important as the soon returning come of our Savior, right? When sharing information, right, assess first where somebody is and give information in a way that's not threatening. But also remember that there is a sense of urgency, and that what is the most important is that we demonstrate this character of Christ and reflect His light while sharing truth. If we get frustrated and angry when we're sharing truth, there's no light in us. We may actually even have an understanding of what the truth is, but we may not have light. And so we are to communicate light. We are called to expose darkness, but it must be done with light. Ephesians 5:11, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. That's a little paraphrase right there that I liked by a source that I trust. Number 5, when replying, use credible citations. Right? If you're in a conversation, if you're in a debate, if you're talking about a topic, right, avoid giving opinions. Focus on demonstrable facts. If you can show evidence of sources that they trust, it's even better. An example of this is that there has become a large polarization. And so some sources, you may say, I don't trust that source. And yet another person says, oh, well, if they say it, then it's true. Okay? We need to stay objective when communicating. Use credible sources, and again, avoid any sort of sensationalism. There's this next rule that I talk about, which is what I call the toilet paper rule, right? Toilet paper roll rule means pretend that you're looking through a toilet paper roll, right? You got the end of the toilet paper roll, you put it up to your eye, you look through it, you can't see the whole room, right? All you're able to do is see a part of the room that you're in. So pretend that you're looking through your hands, you're looking through a toilet paper roll, and explain things in a focused way until ultimately those who you're sharing it to understand that first piece. They may not get the bigger picture yet, but if you can be focused on one little area and not skip all over the place, because that's what happens. People get excited, they want to prove something, and all of a sudden they're trying to connect dots, and they're just all over the place, and people have no idea where they're going. And you sound crazy. Okay? understand that if you can stay focused, calm, avoid sensationalism, talk about, things that you can prove rationally, then follow a thread and slowly piece together the bigger picture for them. Follow the thread to the next piece. Right? Remember that it can be hard for someone who's not familiar with the topic to understand something, especially something that's very complex. So go in pieces, don't jump around frantically, and eventually you'll be able to share the bigger picture. In 1 Corinthians 13:12, we are told that we now cannot see things in their full context, for we see things through a glass darkly. But there will be a time when we see things as they are. Until then, be sympathetic of those that are waking up. Don't try to jump on them. Don't pounce on them. Help them to just see small pieces and allow them to then expand and see things bigger. The next rule, number 7, be trustworthy in all things. This is a beautiful quote by Ellen White that describes how to know someone has truth or not. She reads, "We will not have to inquire whether or not others have truth, for it will be seen in their characters. If we are guided by God's objective truth, our characters will show it." I want to leave us with this, and we move to the next piece, is that, again, remember that there's a great responsibility that comes with having somebody's trust. And we must use this power responsibility because trust brings power, right? Information also brings power. In this next module, I want to explore how information is power and how information is guarded to reserve and restrict the power of others. Now, we know a lot of what we know thanks to an act called the Freedom of Information Act. And we really need to start this story of information and power through this narrative. If we were to understand this act, right, it was an act that was signed into law. It essentially gives the public insight into the private dealings of the government. Now, again, there should not be private dealings of a government because the idea is that a government should be for the people. But we're way past that, so let's not try and put that. Let's just focus on what we can deal with. What we have access to. And what we find is that, this law was actually reluctantly signed into law, I should say, by President Johnson, who actually considered vetoing it. After it was passed in Congress, LBJ, who usually loves these big displays of signings, wrote "no ceremony" on a memo to his staff, who he stated that he told them that he hated the idea of journalists and the public viewing government files, which would be, and as he wrote, quotes, "challenge the official view of reality." Okay? So there's this concept of creating the official reality. It's subjective truth. It's not objective truth. It's not real. It's just the reality that will ensure that the American people, keep waking up every day and go to work and punch their time clocks and, make the billionaires more money, right? It's this whole concept of how you control is to, how you maintain order is to control. In this signing statement, if you would actually look it up, right, he wrote that there must always be military secrets, and the NSA, not private citizens, should determine its restrictions. He did not allow the other parts of the statement, which were written by his staff, but he let his staff write some other pieces to this, but his memos show that he was, upset, like literally upset, in order to sign his name even on this statement. Ultimately, the bill did pass, and the U.S. government reluctantly made a way for citizens to access information. There are, however, many exceptions that are used to deny these requests. The most frequent used is Exemption 5, right, which is coined the "withhold it because you want to" exemption. And under the Obama administration, spiked to use over 80,000 requests out of this preference. And so we see ultimately that there are many ways that the government can even stop these requests from coming through. In 2019, only 30% of the requests were granted, 57 were granted but heavily redacted, and 5% only were denied entirely. So These numbers, though, are even misleading. So you think, oh, 57% was released. Well, look at the numbers. As we learned from a detailed article by the Sunlight Foundation, how Congress passes laws to stop a judge from forcing an agency to comply and add in other barriers to stop the request. So even if it's granted, it can still be stopped. Another tactic is to delay the release of information. A recent example of this was how the Food and Drug Administration responded to a FOIA request related to Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine, and he said it would take 55 years to give the information requested. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. In the instance of Bloomberg, who made this request, who made a FOIA request to the Treasury, when researching the $300 billion in securities the government had granted Citigroup, they were stalled for 20 months and then completely redacted almost everything that was released. Literally, this is a common practice of redacting some or even all of the document. So while you're technically given the document, all the information is removed. And this is even if they find the records. Many requests just say the record does not exist. An instance, Rosemary Woods, she deleted the audio to protect Nixon, or Trump purportedly, flushing documents down the toilet. Okay, so what's the point of this? Simply that people in government hide records that don't support the reality they're trying to create, or as LGB put it, that challenge the official view of reality. Information is curated and manicured to maintain a common narrative. Now, what we find out, though, is that over time, we do start to see things. There is, however, truth somehow seems to come out through different mediums, different methods, whether it's, declassification is one method, failed leaks and redactions, right? Failed redactions and leaks, I should say, are other methods. But let's just talk about declassification. This is the process, of removing the specific classification of a document. So one way information is available to the public is through declassification. This is typically done after 25 years, unless it's deemed sensitive, and then it can be 75 years or longer. And we've seen examples of this, which we'll talk about. If we go into the FOIA reading room for the CIA, and here's the URL for that, it has a massive dump of documents which you can sift through. And one of the documents was related to a 1973 internal report where the CIA employees were calling out the activity of the CIA as flat out criminal. It was called the Family Jewels. And it was about 700 pages that were released. And from this release, some of the issues, cited during this period include one that was so bad it was flat out redacted. Another was identified that the CIA was using the mafia to attempt an assassination of Fidel Castro. Right? There was reports of torture, giving equipment to the local police to target dissidents. Project Mockingbird was the illegal surveillance of reporters and outright propaganda. Right? So what we find is that, there is a lot of it, while we don't know everything, and while a lot of things are not, disclosed, even through Freedom of Information Act, there still is information that is released. There's so much that they can't seem to hold it all in. And we can kind of, go through this one document called Family Jewels in the CIA reading room, and, it shades an interesting light. What this all leads to is that the idea that while conspiracy theorists may seem crazy, what they are saying may be true, right? So crazy, but maybe not wrong, right? If that crazy uncles of yours says, the CIA controls the media, right? I mean, be careful to dismiss the claim, because what we found, let's just go through it, right? Based on disclosure that we saw as part of Family Jewels, we find that Operation Mockingbird was a large-scale program of the CIA to manipulate the news media for the propaganda purposes, right? So ultimately, it turns out that the CIA was actually controlling the entire media narrative. Since the 1950s, the CIA started recruiting journalists, editors, and students in order to write propaganda, these false stories, write propaganda articles, right? The CIA's stories were entirely propaganda, and their employees were paid huge salaries in order to promote this fake news. Essentially, the CIA managed to control both the national and international newspapers through what came down to essentially bribing. During the 1950s, Cord Meyer and Alan Dulles devised an organized propaganda outreach program. They recruited leading American journalists into a network in order to promulgate the CIA's views. CIA went to extremes of funding these students, cultural organizations, and magazines that would spread the CIA's views of events. So again, maintaining the illusion, the narrative. And if you start looking at what all the things the CIA did that are fact, then had overthrowing governments, using drugs in order to fund illegal wars, drug sales, like bringing drugs into the country, selling them, using that money in order to fund drugs, private missions and things like this. It's crazy. This is all complete fact, right? According to documents that on file at CIA headquarters, more than 400 American journalists who in the past 25 years have secretly carried out assignments for the CIA, they've had this relationship with the most powerful individuals, including all the main ones, NBC, ABC, United Press, Reuters, Newsweek, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of the main agencies have been coordinating with the CIA. And so the CIA has direct influence on Associated Press, Reuters, right? These are essentially the nerve, the nerve center, so to speak, right? That's pushing this media narrative and this framing down through the various networks. News agencies are rarely in the public eye, yet they're one of the most influential, at the same time, the least known media types. These are key institutions of substantial importance to any media system. They are the invisible nerve center that connects all parts of the system. Right? And this is a quote by a book that it actually was a German book, but man, it was interesting. Discussing the direct involvement during the war and how there was an official narrative pushed to ultimately get us into war and keep us there. It's not just the CIA, right? We also see how the White House and the Pentagon have fed stories to news outlets. One example we saw during the Iraq War was, these were not independently investigated, but instead taken as fact. And the editors who tried to, who were fed to, ultimately out to these field reporters, just read them. And so people were there, in country, on assignment, doing no research of their own, doing, no investigative journalism of their own. They're standing there like puppets, in the theater of combat, right? In this theater, and are given a script. They go back, from their hotel room out to a place that looks interesting with a background. They read a script that was given to them by the Pentagon to say, and then they go back to their hotel room, essentially. It's just crazy. And we are thinking that, these are independent journalists. They're out there on the ground and they're finding out what's going on, but they weren't. Former CIA officer and whistleblower John Stockwell is quoted, "1/3 of my staff in this task force were propagandists, those whose professional career job was to make up stories, finding ways of getting themselves into the press." In 2019, this investigation disclosed that the U.S. government had an annual budget of $4.7 billion with a B. The government, again, spending $4.7 billion under what was labeled influence operations and staffed over 27,000 PR specialists in order to get this, maintain this narrative. Disinformation, now remember, again, disinformation does not mean false information. It means misleading information, misplaced, irrelevant, fragmented, superficial information that creates an illusion of knowing something, but would actually, in fact, lead someone away from knowing anything. Now, again, there are still credible journalists who are fighting for the truth. Although I don't trust the overall system, I do believe that there are still some credible journalists who are fighting for truth in a corrupt system. And so be careful saying that the media is all lies and not believing any of it, right? The term fake news was also part of a disinformation campaign to destabilize our country and make sure that you can really trust anyone and move us out to these extremist, this is why, these extremist networks were able to take hold, right? So the same campaign that pushed people in the arms of independent journalists, some who had no journalistic ethics And we saw this, right? Such as Alex Jones, who grabs his audience by pushing conspiracy theories in order to sell a supplement line. Now, does that mean everything Alex Jones says is false? No. He's, has some theories that are not conspiracies that he's pushing, but it doesn't mean that everything he says is true. Also, he is such a sensationalist that you can't really even believe what he's saying, because he wants the ratings more than anything. If you actually read the transcripts of his divorce hearing, custody battle over his kids, he says, well, that's just a persona I play on TV. Like, he literally just completely, negates any credibility he has in this, in this courtroom hearing. And, this is right or left. This is not just a slam on Alex Jones, right? Based on first-person testimony in court cases, it's now understood in a legal sense that news shows are opinions and performance. So it doesn't matter if you're watching the right or the left, it contains opinions at best and outright lies at worst. Okay? So the corporate media, I believe, has some more accountability, but also a greater ability to push more subtle narratives over longer periods of time. Independent media, in many instances, has even less accountability. And, you have to understand also that it's the way that it makes its money oftentimes is through views. And so it requires this sensationalism in order to build audiences, right? Now, again, this does not make one side more trustworthy than the other. It's just important to understand that we cannot blindly trust one or the other, right? Independent media has its own agenda. Corporate media is the truth mixed with lies in order to keep a narrative, right? Independent media is sensationalizing aspects of the truth in order to get viewership. So you really can't, again, going back to if someone says the CIA controls the media, they're not wrong, actually. So does the Pentagon. So does the White House. The next claim, if someone was to say, the government's spying on us, right? Again, a very factual claim. The government has clearly demonstrated this does not like its secrets getting out, even to its own citizens. But it, through Edward Snowden, would disclose that it had numerous global surveillance programs, not just on outside, but also domestically. Now, this is where news provides this priming and framing on topics. What you think of Edward Snowden is based on how you heard the story framed. If you think he's a criminal hacker who's helping the Russians, it's because you were told to think this, right? If you think he's a patriotic whistleblower who's in exile, it's based around the way the story was framed. I'll be clear. I don't fully know, what the relationship is, what he has to do now to get Russia protection, but I can definitely tell you that the United States does not want him to be credible and has done everything in their way to frame him in a light to remove his credibility. Why? Because if they can remove his credibility, that means what he exposed would then also be, well, I don't know if we can trust that. Although, today we know it's undisputed fact that the NSA was collecting tons of records, mass surveillance on private citizens, just collecting that data in the idea that we can use it in the future. And so they're literally building every word that you say is being collected. Every word that you say is being put into databases and analyzed. Now, they don't have to, they can run algorithms on top of things and figure out who is likely a threat, right? But that goes against the whole idea of policing. We'll get into that another time. Unless Snowden had gone through and leaked this, we would never know about the top secret tools which map out the data that it collected, and from computers and networks and telephone networks and computers, etc. It was called PRISM, right? One of the programs was called PRISM, and it was a government surveillance program that collected internet data. It was operated by the NSA, and since 2007, it gave U.S. intelligence operatives access to a wide range of private online information, emails, photos, files, including data from every one of these major companies. Microsoft started sharing their data. Yahoo started. Google's now sharing their cloud data. everything that's now placed in the cloud is no longer your computer. What's the incentive for that? What's the incentive to have everything be shared in the cloud? Well, yeah, if you have multiple computers, it's easy to do that. But how many people do, right? There's very few of us that actually use the cloud in the sense of how it's supposed to be, right? Where I'm connecting, sure, I've got multiple devices and I use the cloud because it's very convenient to go from one laptop to another, a desktop to a laptop, etc. Having everything synced on your phones. But most people don't really need the cloud, and yet they opt themselves into it. They're literally just handing their data over, Dropboxes, etc. Okay? In essence, everything that you do online can be accessed and tracked by the U.S. government. So how did the U.S. respond to this data being leaked? Well, the CIA sent a team to kidnap Snowden. This is a fact. Okay, this is reported by the Register, that they literally were operating these different black sites, torture centers, and they were trying to get a hold of Snowden and kidnap him. It seems to be a trend for the CIA. So just in September of 2021, we learned that the CIA had a plot to kidnap and even assassinate WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Now, again, Julian Assange is another one of those names. What you think of Julian Assange is based on how the media was framed. If the first thing you think about right now is Julian Assange is some sort of pedophile, well, that was how it was, how the media had framed it, right? What's interesting is that, what was one of the methods that CIA used to discredit him? Well, they discredited him through a propaganda campaign to damage his reputation. Right? But then these charges were debunked as the guy who, the key witness against him, admitted to lying in exchange for immunity to the FBI. And so the media outlets were quick to spread the lies, but they never reported the acquittal of the charges. So some would just think, well, Assange is a criminal, right? Because that's what the media said. But then after the lies were, acquitted, the media never actually picked up on it and said, oh, well, actually, he wasn't a criminal. Okay. So again, as I'm reading this, Julian Assange, in fact, he's now in custody, right? When I actually originally created this slide, he was still hiding out in an embassy. But what's interesting is that, I'll get ahead of my head self. I won't go down this whole path. Research this for yourself. You're going to find out it's very interesting. The U.S. is trying to bring him into the States, and they'll probably be successful with that. Anytime somebody steps out and tries to point out the hypocrisy of the United States, you'll see what happens to them, right? Julian Assange was a journalist, and the reason why they hate him was because he published the full details of the CIA's global covert hacking program called Vault 7. This is why he became a target of the CIA. I can't even tell you, but I can't tell you the details, but I can tell you this. When these types of programs were, let's just say, exposed, there became a huge market to generate new ones. And I know this for a fact. I won't respond further to that. The point is this: remember that those who expose darkness will be attacked by those who are trying to hide in it. The next claim: if someone says, well, the FBI is infiltrating, whatever group that they say, again, this was released as a fact. Well, it's well known that the FBI used illegal tactics of surveillance, infiltration, discrediting and disrupting any organization it identified as dangerous to national security. The documents the tactics are all documented, including creating false narratives, slandering groups, creating conflicts in groups, and other methods of interference. The FBI went so far as to anonymously mail a letter to Martin Luther King Jr. in an effort to persuade him to commit suicide after singling him out as a threat in his 1976 speech. So the CIA sends him a letter and says, kill yourself. Okay? We're going to get into this more in a little bit. It's just bizarre what the government has done. We'll touch on this later. Okay. What about an even crazier claim that the government is testing mind control and torturing citizens? This is also a fact. Project MKUltra was an illegal human experiment program by the CIA, which used numerous different methods to manipulate its subjects' mental states, using psychoactive drugs such as LSD, electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, even sexual abuse, forms of other torture, in order to test ultimately, if they could control humans, if they could actually manipulate mental states, and if they could actually do mind control. Sidney Gottlieb, who is the head of this project, essentially arranged for the CIA to buy the world's entire supply of LSD at the time. And through pretending it to be fictitious research, foundations got hospitals, prisons, and other institutions to carry out research projects on how LSD could be used for mind control. Okay? So I don't know what $240,000 is in today's economy, but a lot of money to literally buy all of the LSD in the world and then convince hospitals and prisons and other institutions to do these little experiments using this. Right? This is all documented, right? In the research by Stephen Kinzer quotes that we do not know how many people died, but a number did, and many lives were permanently destroyed. Some of the notable effects from MKUltra, the participants include the Unabomber, who spent 200 hours with Henry Murray and was linked to MKUltra experiments, as well as the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, right, Sirhan, whose defense that he was operating under MKUltra and mind control techniques. Okay, so again, be careful, okay, making assumptions past this. This is a fact, but then don't go and past this, right? This is where the facts and the theories begin. Be careful making assumptions that the government was training assassins through mind control or anything else. The facts are bad enough to the government was funding dangerous psychological tests and really torturing, even killing people as part of a quest for understanding mind control. That's a fact. There's no need to go any further. Going any further, right? If we start making assumptions based on the motives, which may be unclear, you now may be stepping on a credibility trap. So this is, again, going back to this whole concept. It's so important that we avoid jumping to conclusions. Stick what's what you know is a fact, what you can prove. Don't jump further to conclusions. An example, right? Ultimately is then this killing spree in the 1960s, right? This is where it can be tough not to jump to conclusions. So what we know is fact through the CONINTEL program, that MLK Jr. was sent a letter telling himself to just kill himself. The same year, JFK was killed. 5 years later, MLK was assassinated along with Robert Kennedy. Now, these are facts, okay? But were you to jump to the conclusion to say they're all connected and the CIA was on a killing spree in the 1960s, well, it does seem obvious based on the data, but if you start to share this conclusion, you're going to be on dangerous territory. So to maintain credibility, do not leap to conclusions. Even when the data seems so obvious, it's better to keep your conclusions yourself and just share facts to maintain the credibility, okay? Again, be patient. The truth always comes out. If you, in the early days of things, when you can't prove something and you put yourself out there, you stake your reputation on something, you can lose your credibility. And again, this doesn't mean cower. This doesn't mean not standing up for what's right. It's just pick your battles. Does it matter if the CIA went on a killing spree in the 60s? No, it's not going to change anything today. When you could actually just show what the CIA actually did during the 60s, right? That's bad enough. You don't have to go any further. If the whole point is to show that there is horrible things going on, just stating the facts and sticking to what you can prove is strong enough. But what's interesting, again, is that if you give things time, the narrative always plays out. So one example of this, the origin of the pandemic. If you were to say in 2020 that the pandemic was essentially funded by U.S. taxpayers, right, through NIH grants, even when this was public on their website, you were called a crazy conspiracy theorist. But you fast forward 2 years, and now it's okay to suggest it, right? You fast forward another year, and it's no longer a conspiracy theory. Now it's just an accepted scenario, right? So ultimately what we see, it's interesting that even the White House can publish a press release saying the lab leak was actually funded through NIH, but those who bought into the narrative early on that, oh no, don't say that, it was just an accident. You can't say that it happened in a wet market. People were eating bats in a wet market in China. And yeah, it did originate in Wuhan, but not the Wuhan lab. Don't say that it originated in the Wuhan lab. It originated in the Wuhan wet market down the street, like a mile from the lab, right? It's just ridiculous. The same people that were fed that narrative, and if you were to say to them something obvious, like, well, it's called the, corona bat, it's a bat thing, and there's gain of function research happening a mile away. So even if it circulated somehow through the wet market, it came from this lab. If you were to suggest that 3 years ago, you're told crazy. Now it's a fact, okay? But what's crazy though is that the same people that will still push against it today, because they had placed this, their cognitive biases was already formed, right? They had identified what they saw as truth, right? And they may be even more happy, like we talked about in an earlier slide, if I can find it here. Yeah, here, right? They're happier with the uncomfortable lie that, oh no, it's not connected, right? Than the unpleasant truth that, oh no, okay, I guess we funded that. Okay. It is easier to just accept a lie than confront the fact you've been lied to. But we need to be reevaluating what we know. There is a little joke here, right? The joke is that the difference between a conspiracy theory and a fact is about 6 months. Now, it's actually more like a few years. But I hope that this is gives a sense really on the importance of credibility, right? The importance of a need to study for ourselves, a need to pick the topics that are actually important, right? Don't go spending your credibility on something that actually doesn't matter. And that's the next piece. And so I'm going to continue this whole thing in part 2, and I'm going to go into topics about aliens, which, by the way, if you're in the news right now, all of a sudden aliens are like, no, that's a thing. We even have alien technology. We have dead aliens, they're saying now. And this is coming from the government. It's saying, yeah, we actually have, we have alien spaceship that we've been trying to reverse engineer, right? But a couple years ago, if you were to say, and by the way, if you want to, I'll talk more about this in part 2, but highly recommend Starfall, the movie. Brad Burnham is doing a great work on covering this whole idea of aliens from the lens of a biblical lens, and actually just showing that this is a deception that's happening. And the whole thing is a deception in order to lay out something greater that's coming, but I won't get into that right now. The point simply is, a couple years ago, if you were to say that aliens existed, and again, I don't believe that aliens exist in the sense of alien beings here able to access, this petri dish of humanity. But if you were to say that a couple years ago, you're completely crazy. And now the government's saying, no, that it's real, right? And they're doing whole hearings around this, right? Other things, are topics that if you lead them too far, you will come to a conclusion that you will lose your credibility. So in my next part, I'm going to talk about things like moon landings and things like that, right? And a lot of other topics through a logical lens and a cautious step. And so look forward to that, sharing that presentation with you. If you do like these type of presentations, I got a lot more of this content that I produce on everything from marketing to homesteading to theology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Highly recommend taking a look at that, and keep your eye out for credibility traps. If you like what you're watching, subscribe, and you'll be able to get the notifications. And go ahead and hit like and all that other kind of stuff if you made it this far, because that helps the algorithms, which I don't really chase after, but maybe I should in order to get this information out a little bit more. So again, thank you so much for watching, and talk to you in the next video.